Welcome to the group of lectures about collecting actual qualitative data. Over the course of the next couple of lectures, this is what I'd like you to be able to take away. I want you to be able to describe different kinds of data collection or designs and have a good, strong sense of some do's and don'ts for making observations, to be able to describe interviews and some of the do's and don'ts for that. I want you to be able to talk about documents and artifact collections and give some examples of those. And then field observations and other techniques kind of goes back up with observations. So we'll go ahead and get started here. There are 5 main research designs, and I put / traditions because these are not designs that are driven by statistical analyses, so they have to be in a specific way. They're kind of general traditions or types of designs. And as with any type of research, your choice of data to collect and the techniques for collecting them is driven by your research topic and your study design, and you have a lot of leeway in qualitative designs. I'm going to focus on these 5 types and would like you to be pretty confident in recognizing each type. For each type, I'm going to start by giving 2 or 3 examples of research problems, statements, or questions, and then point out the pieces that characterize it. So, starting with ethnography, let's look at the first example here. This study examines the beliefs and practices Beliefs and practices are part of a culture, and in this case, the focus in this first example is going to be on the shared culture of those teachers and what they share as a group. Now look at the second example. Again, peer groups, we're talking about a shared culture. This example actually comes from a study of African American boys who sometimes really struggle with the peer pressure to not appear too engaged in learning, or they're going to be accused of acting white. So now look at the third example of an ethnography. The researcher here is looking at a particular phenomenon, the conflicts felt, but the focus again is going to be on the shared experience of this group of teachers, the culture that they have, and the shared beliefs and norms and feelings. And I hope these examples help you to see what an ethnography is. An ethnographic study examines and details a social group or a culture that's shared within a group. The researcher interprets the patterns and gives meaning to them. The descriptions are always of the shared experiences and look for patterns the group shares. Culture in this case is defined as the shared pieces, not the individualistic beliefs, meanings, or behaviors. A real ethnography is a subset of an ethnography, a realistic ethnography, and that's where the researcher stays completely outside the group and doesn't participate and is just this detached, dispassionate observer. And it's really quite common in education where researchers come in from the outside into a classroom and start observing or describing but is not part of the group. Really important in that case, if you're going to stay as an outsider, not to project your interpretations or beliefs, but to rely on the group for that shared interpretation they have. So, ethnography, the secret there is to look for the shared experiences or beliefs or behaviors that are happening within the group. Let's move on to describing case studies. You've probably run into these in your educational career. Take a look at the first one. This is an instrumental case study. In other words, it's looking at a theme or issue, in this case, inclusion. And notice that it focuses only on 3 individuals. Case studies sometimes follow a single individual to describe a theme or an issue or something unique about them. Now look at the second example there. This is an example of an intrinsic case study because it focuses on a theme, inclusion, but this time it's using a description of an example of that theme or issue. It's using this school as an example of inclusion, as opposed to the first one, which was focusing on the experiences of three students. So case studies are in-depth descriptions or analyses that focus on a single thing, either an event, a place or setting, a program or strategy, a group, or some kind of system that's bounded. Very often, case studies focus on an individual, a single entity, and it could be a single teacher, a single student, and then it gives details of that one case's experience. Case studies are always defined by time and space. In other words, they're done within a specific time frame, such as a school year or a unit, and they take place in one place, such as a classroom, a school, a home, etc. An informal education setting like a museum. All of this means that the case studies are very difficult to generalize to another setting or time or group. Phenomenological designs describe a person's experience with a phenomenon. So look at the first example. It's describing the phenomenon of bullying from the perspectives of both the victims and the perpetrators. It is not an ethnographic study because it's not looking for a shared culture among these people, but it's looking at how the individuals from different perspectives experience this situation of bullying. Now look at the second one. In this case, that relationship is the phenomenon. It's looking at the disconnect between admin schooling and admin experience. Kind of like you might have felt a disconnect from your teacher school and your teacher experience. The researcher wants to gather the perspectives of each principal and how they experience the disconnect, and the focus is on that disconnect. So individual experiences are the focus of a phenomenological design. The researcher wants to document the experiences of individuals and get their perspectives on the experience. These studies are based on the belief that there are multiple ways of interpreting the same experience. We all see things differently. If you and I experience the same event, we very often see it, understand it, make meaning of it in very different ways. So if I'm studying the relationship between coursework and the duties of first-year principals, I'm expecting that each principal will experience something a little different and be able to express that or show it somehow. The meaning for each principal is the reality for that individual, and that matters. Let's look at the first example of a grounded theory study. So the situation was observed, that these teachers went to the same bar, and this group of teachers went to the same bar. So this study brought up questions, and the situation was studied until an explanation could be generated. Now look at the second example. Once again, after a lot of study, interviews, observations, etc., the researcher was able to develop an explanation or a theory and explain what was happening there. So grounded theory studies use all of the data collected to discover or uncover or generate a theory to explain something. In this case, theory means a set of propositions about the phenomenon. It's called grounded theory because it's grounded It's built on the data collected in the field. Grounded theory studies, I'm sorry about that, grounded theory studies work really well for research about what happened, why it happened, and what it means to people. Data of different kinds are gathered, and they're carefully coded back and forth, comparing, finding patterns, allowing a theory or an explanation to bubble out. These studies can be very systematic, with rigorous methods, categorizing and coding, or they can be emergent or less structured and more flexible. They can also be very constructivist, focusing on the perspectives, beliefs, and feelings, and then coding for changes within those as this movement happens or something grows. Look at the first case here for a critical study. In the first case, you can see the obvious struggles these women would have as they made choices. Some struggled with whether to try to work, or whether their benefits were better in the welfare system. One mother, for example, explained that she could make more money working, but then her health care costs and her child care costs pushed it over into being better off economically to use welfare. So those were the kinds of situations that are being studied in a critical study. Look at the second one. You can see in this second example that these young men would be fighting stereotypes about African American basketball players, along with stereotypes about African Americans in the educational setting and how engaged they get into schoolwork. There would be conflicts that seem to go with this cultural peer pressure about doing well in school for African American teenage boys. So critical does not mean criticizing. It means that the researcher is calling attention to a power inequity usually. It really is a type of ethnography because it's looking at a cultural situation or those shared experiences by a group of people. And it tends to look at the struggles of marginalized groups or individuals, and to contrast that, or to point out, or to demonstrate the systems of power and control and equity that are in the situation. Critical studies are often used for advocating for a power or change in some kind of perception or inequities. So critical studies are usually action kind of things where the researcher has found a situation and definitely has an agenda or a concern. I think it should be clear now that qualitative research designs are very different from quantitative research. And this is because the logic or reasoning behind the designs are very different. Quantitative research uses deductive reasoning. So deductive reasoning starts with a theory or some kind of explanation. Then it puts forth a hypothesis, gathers data to support or refute the hypothesis, and finally researches and comes up with a conclusion that we can use. So that's the pattern we tend to follow with quantitative research. Qualitative research, however, is usually not looking for data to support a hypothesis. Instead, this kind of reasoning, inductive reasoning, starts with the observations or the data and allows patterns to emerge. So something is noticed and a pattern emerges. Then an explanation comes forward as you gather more data. And if the data is powerful enough, or there's enough of it, there's sometimes a theory about the behavior that emerges. So these two kinds of research are actually diametrically opposing. They're coming at building knowledge from completely different foundations. So remember from your reading that qualitative research is inductive, and so the researcher starts with information and then moves to an explanation and proposing a theory. This chart kind of gives you a summary of the different types of qualitative research designs. So going down the left, the different types, the ethnography, that is mostly done through observation. And then backing that up really with interviews and document analysis. The purpose of an ethnography is to describe those shared experiences or a cultural situation. A case study, on the other hand, when you're doing a good case study, you're going to be doing observations and interviews and document analysis, and I'll talk about those a bit in the next lecture. But the purpose of a case study is that in-depth description of a very specific person or situation and a couple of people in those situations. Phenomenal, oh boy, I'm having trouble talking tonight. I'm sorry. Is the primary data there is going to be an interview. That's going to help you most because you're trying to get at the person's experiences in the situation and their perspective. And then sometimes you can also look at documents. And the purpose of that kind of study is to describe experiences within a phenomenon or a situation. Grounded theory, remember, it's a theory that emerges based on the data, so it's grounded in the data. The primary data there is an interview, although observations can also be used really well with grounded theory studies. And then those can be secondary data. Remember that a grounded theory allows the theory or the explanation to emerge out of the data. A critical study, the purpose of that, let's start with that. It's the researcher, there is an agenda. They're examining societal power or inequities or something that could be changed in society. And so the primary data for that one are interviews and observations. Keep in mind that there can be combinations of these two, and you will see case studies that are really part of an ethnography, of phenomenological studies that really have a critical stance to them or would go with a critical study. So in the next two parts of the lecture, I'm going to focus on the different kinds of data for each of these and how these are to be collected or analyzed.